Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and this is Horror Mayhem Week number 3, Cosmic Horror. This is an event created by the Bookish Bryants. I am a co-host among many other co-hosts. And this week we are doing cosmic horror stories. And essentially this is a genre of the horror created by H.P. Lovecraft. There are some earlier precursors to the cosmic horror before Lovecraft, but he is essentially credited with creating it. So what am I going to read? Well, initially, I had wanted to read an Italian novel called The 20 Days of Tauren. And this was written in the 70s. It was about a group psychological collapse. But I read the first half of the chapter. I was not digging it. I forced my way through to the end of the chapter, and I decided this is just not what I want to be reading right now. I do think it'll be a good book when I am more in the mood for it. Why it didn't work, I don't really know, but there you go. So what am I going to read instead? Well, I am going to go for some classic short stories. A trilogy of short stories. These can be found in the Tales of the Cthulhu mythos. And the first short story is The Shambler from the Stars by Robert Bloch. The second short story will be The Haunter of the Dark by H.P. Lovecraft. And finishing it up with The Shambler from the Stars, also by Robert Bloch. Now, what is interesting about these short stories and why they're connected is that originally Robert Bloch wrote the short story The Shambler from the Stars. And then H.P. Lovecraft wrote a reply short story, and that was The Haunter of the Dark. And then Robert Bloch replied to Lovecraft's reply with The Shambler from the Stars. So that's what I'm going to be reading. And I did read The Shambler from the Stars. No, it's called the Shadow from the Steeple is the third one. And I read A Shambler from the Stars this morning. And it features a writer of weird tales. And he describes how he's physically and mentally unfit for manual work. So he had to become a writer. And it's a story of how he struggled to become a writer and how he found success as a horror writer. But he wanted to be more than just a horror writer. He wanted to write about something real because vampires and werewolves and so forth weren't really real. So in this short story, he starts seeking out mysterious books. These are the occult books like the Cote de Ghouls or the Necronomicon. And in this story, he finds one of these ancient books. And let's just say, something happens when he reads that book, or we'll just leave it at that. And yes, it is cosmic horror. I really enjoyed this short story. Robert Bloch has a much more friendly style than H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft can sometimes be a little convoluted in his writing, but Robert Bloch is very clean writing. So that's what I read this morning, and I will be reading a short story a day until I finish my trilogy, and maybe I will go beyond that. We'll see. Hello, it's Monday night, and I am continuing with Cosmic Horror Week, and I am on to my second short story, The Haunter of the Dark by H.P. Lovecraft. Now, before I get into that story, just take a look at this old paperback cover. These are the Lovecraft covers that I discovered when I was in 6th grade. This is the only actual book from that time period that I keep, the 2 volumes of the Tales of the Cthulhu mythos, and just look at that cover. They all had heads with worms or iron brackets holding them together and bats trying to crawl out. And these are just great old covers. And if I ever saw them again in the used bookstore, I'd rebuy them, but they're probably very expensive right now and probably not such great condition. Mine's in pretty good condition, but these are great. So back to the short story, The Haunter of the Dark. This is a response story, as I said in the last video, to Robert Bloch's story, The Shambler from the Stars. It is dedicated to Robert Bloch. The first short story by Robert Bloch was not dedicated to H.P. Lovecraft, but the final story, as if I am pretty sure, is going to be it's The Shadow from the Steeple. But back to A Haunter of the Dark. It is a story narrated by someone a little bit of obscure, talking about an author called Robert Blake, not Bloch, Blake. This author is a writer of weird tales and a painter of weird paintings. And he goes to Provincetown, Rhode Island, which was Lovecraft's hometown. And he becomes obsessed with an abandoned church. This church has been abandoned since 1877, I believe. And the story was published in 1835. And this author goes into this old church that was abandoned because the people worship something that maybe they shouldn't have been worshiping. And he discovers a body of a reporter that's been laying undiscovered for many years. And he discovers something else. And when he makes this discovery, he awakens something. Now, the story is called The Haunter of the Dark. Now, it's not a real spoiler to say that he awakens the Haunter of the Dark. And the Haunter of the Dark is a creature that shuns light. And there is a great little description of, as Lovecraft says, Italians. Now, everyone knows that Lovecraft was a horrible racist, and he had low opinions of the Italians, but the Italians talked about something in the church that was waiting for darkness to leave the church. And this thing that does not like the light knows where Robert Blake lives. And it is very evocative. I mean, Lovecraft's writing style, as I said, can be a little convoluted, but he can actually really capture atmosphere very well sometimes. And he does that very well. There is a part at the end of the story where the town of Provincetown is experiencing power outages. And when there are power outages, there are no lights. And where there are no lights, there is the Haunter of the Dark. So I really enjoyed this short story. I don't know if it's one of Lovecraft's best, but just that image of this creature waiting to find Robert Blake when there is no light is just fabulous. And which story is better? It's hard to say. There is a very slight connection. It's more of a thematic connection, I think, that H.P. Lovecraft was saying, yeah, you wrote a story about this creature, the Shambler from the Stars, so I'm going to write this story called The Haunter of the Dark. And they're sort of thematically connected. And it's very interesting to read them back to back. Now, what will I think tomorrow when I read The Shambler from the Stars? A reply from Robert Bloch to H.P. Lovecraft's reply to his first story. I don't know. I know I have read this short story before, The Shambler from the Stars. I just don't remember a thing about it. Good night. The Shadow from the Steeple by Robert Bloch. This is a direct sequel to H.P. Lovecraft's story, The Haunter of the Dark. It was written in 1950, and it actually features Lovecraft's story as a plot development. It is the story of a man named Fisk, who was a friend of Robert Blake in the original Haunter of the Dark short story. And he has been trying to figure out how Blake died. And I won't go into the details of that short story. This short story actually reiterates Lovecraft's story pretty well, but it's set 15 years later, where he is searching for a mysterious doctor who was involved with Blake and signed the death certificate. And it is a pretty clever cosmic horror story. It actually uses the progress of technology. So it could not have been written earlier. Well, it could have been written a little earlier than 1950, but 1950 is about the right time period for this short story. And I just found it interesting that the Bloch chose it as a direct sequel involving not only H.P. Lovecraft short story, but H.P. Lovecraft himself is briefly featured in this story. And he was a correspondent of the character Fisk. And apparently in this short story, The Haunter of the Dark is a fictionalization of the actual events that happened in Provincetown, Rhode Island. So it was a pretty good group of short stories that started with the Shadow from the Shambler from the Stars, The Haunter of the Dark, and then the Shambler from the Steeple. So check them out. They're a pretty good group of short stories. Bye. The Yellow Key by Robert W. Chambers. This was a story written in 1894, 95, somewhere around there. And it is a pre-cosmic horror short story. It's sort of like one of the early versions of what could cosmic horror be. Is it cosmic horror? Maybe, maybe not. But it is the story of a painter. And he is doing a painting of a nude model named Tessie. And they have a pretty good relationship, and they're always bantering back and forth. And they are talking about a man they see in front of an old abandoned church. Old abandoned churches seem to feature well in these cosmic horror short stories. And this man is also featuring in both their dreams. The woman dreams that the painter is dead, and she sees him being taken down the street in a coffin. And it goes on from there. The painter develops a relationship with this model, and she gives him something that she found on the street. And let's just say this thing belongs to something else, and this something else is going to want to reclaim the item. And it is a very famous short story, and I quite liked it. I did listen to it on audio. It came with a group that a group of short stories that's free download on Audible, and I will list the collection in the notes below. Okay, bye. It's a wrap. Cosmic Horror Week is over. Next week is folk horror. I had originally intended to read The Events at Poworth Farm by T.E.D. Klein, but that's a physical copy, and I'm going to be in Florida next week, and I don't want to haul that book down in a physical format with me. So what I think I'm going to do is read some Arthur Machen, Arlington Blackwood, and maybe some M.R. James. I'll have to pick out the short stories as I go. But since this is the end of Cosmic Horror, say goodbye to Cthulhu. You know that his image is supposed to drive you stark raving mad, but I don't know. I'm not mad yet, or maybe I am mad.